Hi friends, and welcome back to No Book Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and today it's part 2 of my top 12 favourite vintage science fiction paperbacks. Hi, so it's time for part 2 of my top 12 favourite vintage science fiction paperbacks. And if you've seen the video of part 1, thank you very much, because it turns out to be my best performing video for ages. So I thought, well, I have to do part 2 now, don't I? Although I was going to anyway, obviously. Just a quick recap, let's go through the books that I actually selected in part 1, very, very briefly. Those were Wanderers of Time by John Wyndham, Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester, Gateway by Frederick Pohl, Hot House by Brian Aldiss, and finally City by Clifford D. Seamack. And thank you for all your comments. Most people are very positive about those selections. And I've got 6 more for you today. And the first of which is Deathworld 1 by Harry Harrison, which dates, I believe, from 1960. Now, this is the tale of our shiny space-going future, where humanity has conquered vast numbers of planets throughout the galaxy, but crucially, not quite all of them. Now, the story focuses on Jason Denault, an intergalactic gambler who's got a touch of psychic ability which allows him to play the odds in his favour on occasion. Unfortunately, his latest escapade on a casino planet goes belly up. He finds himself on his way to the obscure frontier colony world of Pyrus, where all the flora apparently has just one mission: kill everybody. As a result of this, the human settlers have become much stronger and aggressively violent, simply in order to survive their daily struggle with the planet. And they have no time for someone like Jason, and it seems a toss-up of who's going to kill him first. Will it be the colonists or the natural inhabitants of the planet? Now, this is a slick, fast-paced slice of pulpy science fiction adventure where the action never lets up and the swift pace allows for a highly enjoyable read. And as well as that, there's a very smart and clever twist lurking towards the end. There were 2 sequels, but for me, they didn't quite come up to the standard of this first instalment. Many years later, in fact, over 3 decades, there were more 4 Deathworld books out. These were apparently written by Harrison in collaboration with 2 Russian authors, Ant Skalandis and Mikhail Akhmenov. But these were only published in Russia and Eastern Europe, and Harrison at the time was in his late 70s and early 80s, still working, but it's debatable how much contribution he had to these later instalments. Now, Harrison was a schizophrenic author in a sense, in that he mostly published straightforward entertainments like these and the Stainless Steel Rat series, which have a great deal of humour in them. But at the same time, he also published some far denser, more serious science fiction just as successfully. And it's one of those that's my second pick here. It was almost the first of his Eden trilogy, West of Eden, but that one in the end missed out in favour of Make Room from 1966. The story follows a New York City detective trying to solve a murder, and that is an important part of the plot, but what's more important is the backdrop, because this is a world of the future which has become wildly overpopulated, and the sheer weight of numbers have robbed everyone of their privacy and fundamental human rights. It's a dark and frightening world that Harrison shows us, and probably seemed quite an inevitability back when the book was written in the mid-1960s. To me, it's an absolute classic, and without knowing it, you may already be somewhat familiar with it, because it was adapted in 1973 into the hit movie Soylent Green with Charlton Heston and the wonderful Edward G. Robinson. Now, Harrison famously hated this version of his story, and it is understandable because although I do like the film a lot, it does sacrifice some of the more harrowing aspects, the background information, in favour of a more traditional action-adventure kind of narrative. Still worth a watch though, even if it has considerably less impact than the novel. Next up we have The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, which originally came out in 1950. Now this was a collection of originally published short stories to which Bradbury added a lot of bridging material to create an episodic novel, and of course it concerns humanity's early attempts to colonise Mars. Early expeditions encounter the planet's native population, who are humanoid shape-changing aliens who use illusions to play on the weaknesses and flaws of those early would-be colonists. Now, I became aware of this novel from the 1980 UK-US TV miniseries which starred Rock Hudson. Now, I was really impressed with that as a 15-year-old. I fell in love with it. But looking back on it now, it's more the look of it that I remember more than anything else. And I can't help feeling it might not have stood the test of time too well. Bradbury himself reportedly didn't like it, found it very boring. But it did bring me to his novel, which for me is a far more enjoyable and enduring experience. If you've never read Bradbury, he's a very lyrical writer. He's more interested in the journeys that people take and what it does to them than the technicalities of how they actually manage to get there. And that's a very polite way of saying he's not really interested in the science at all, which strikes a chord with me. I've not read as much Bradbury as perhaps I should have done, although I will say that Something Wicked This Way Comes is also another personal favourite of mine. My next selection is arguably a far more influential and serious novel, which is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, which was originally published in Russia in 1921 and promptly banned by the Soviet censorship boards. Zamyatin managed to get some copies smuggled into the West though, which led to a lot of trouble for him, eventual blacklisting and exile in Paris in the 1930s, where he died penniless in 1937. So what got the party quite so hot under the collar? Well, We is the story of engineer D503, who lives in a glass city of completely straight lines in the 26th century. All the inhabitants live out regimented, passionless lives under the watchful eye of the benefactor and his Bureau of Guardians. D503 is working on a spaceship which will be used to colonise other worlds, but he starts to have doubts about his work and life in general, particularly after he meets female I-303. He becomes increasingly disillusioned and his sleep is troubled by strange dreams. Now, if this sounds very familiar, well, yes, of course, it was a primary influence on George Orwell's 1984 and to an extent on Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Its frightening depiction of a future totalitarian state is unique, highly individual and compelling, and the narrative makes its points without resorting to obvious political posturing or symbolism. Now, as a teen, I missed out on a lot of the subtext. I just enjoyed the strange magic of the tale. But I also found that after I'd finished it, some of the points that Zamyatin was making did kind of creep up on me. At least that was my experience of it. There is, of course, an extra dimension to your appreciation of this work if you read about Zamyatin's life and the persecution he faced as a Russian dissident, the beatings, the frequent incarcerations, the eventual exile to the West. Even without considering all that, though, it's still an immensely powerful work that's still relevant today. It was eventually published in Russia in 1988, but I can't help wondering, can you get a copy in a bookshop in Moscow today? Now it's back to my pulpy roots with 1951's The Puppet Masters from Robert Heinlein, who is of course far better known these days for Starship Troopers, which I didn't really enjoy that much, and later more serious works such as Stranger in a Strange Land, which I'll be mentioning a little bit later. Now, the novel is set in 2007, but it might as well have been the 1950s, as this is a sort of B-movie plot much beloved by filmmakers of that era. Slug-like aliens have taken over the minds of vast numbers of the population of Iowa, and by the time operatives of the secret intelligence agency known as the Section have discovered the plot, they're already controlling several members of Congress. Eventually, the wider authorities become aware of the conspiracy, but has the invasion already progressed past the point of no return? Now, this is gloriously cheesy in the best way possible. A gripping breakneck tale of intrigue, action, and alien slugs riding around on people's backs. It's simply great fun. Now, while researching this post, I actually learned something about the book that I didn't know. The version that I'd read, and the one that was available for many years, was not Heinlein's original work, in the sense that his publisher had insisted on quite a lot of cuts. In fact, losing probably as much as 20% of the original material. All this stuff was reinstated for the 1990 edition. So I'll be looking to buy that when I'm through my Read What You Won't challenge and back to buying books again, because I will be intrigued to actually see how different it is and to read the book again in the first place, which is something that I'm finding more and more as I'm going through these dozen science fiction books. I'm thinking I want to pick these up and try them again. Now, my final selection is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. LeGuin, which was originally published in 1974 and won multiple awards. Now, this is the tale of the physicist Shevek, who is developing a new theory of time. He lives on the moon of Inares, which is run on anarchist lines, but in order to facilitate his work, he has to travel incognito to the home world of Uras, which is a strongly capitalist society. Now, Shevek's new theory of time involves both linear and non-linear elements, two things that seem to be in direct opposition and unreconcilable, and this is reflected in the political systems of the two worlds concerned. And he has to both complete his work and also stay away from the political struggles that are taking place all around him. Now, clearly this does not sound too exciting. It sounds very dry and academic, but crucially, LeGuin manages to marry some pretty weighty concepts with some very interesting characters and a compelling story. So it's very entertaining, but with some intellectual stimulation if you choose to take it. It's a tricky tightrope act, but LeGuin pulls it off seemingly almost effortlessly. And I'm a little surprised that I've never read any more of her work, but we've come to the point in the video where I'm going to explain why in my early 20s I stopped reading science fiction completely, save for finishing up Harry Harrison's bibliography and the Heliconia trilogy by Brian Aldiss, which has already had a couple of passing mentions in these videos. But just before we get to that, let's do some honourable mentions, some books that almost made the top 12 but not quite. And the first two are books I've already mentioned in passing a couple of times. And the first of those is Harry Harrison's West of Eden, which is terrific, and also brilliant, Brian Aldiss and his Heliconia Spring. And coincidentally, both of those are actually the first part of trilogies, which are worth reading, but for me it's those opening books that really hit the spot. After that, let's go for some other selections which I've not referred to before. Bubbling under the top 12 were Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, 2001 A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, and finally 9 Princes in Amber by Roger Zelazny. That's part of this compendium which has all these Amber novels in it, but for me it was the first one again, 9 Princes, that has stuck with me. Now, there are two others that I want to mention that I don't have copies of. The first is A Plague of Demons by Keith Laumer, which my brother had and which I think I read that paperback far more often than he did. Again, I don't know why I never read any more Lama or ever really seriously considered it. I don't think it was, but that novel is just absolutely great. The last one I'm going to mention is a book that I genuinely thought I still had a copy of. I can't understand why I don't. I searched for it everywhere, but it's gone. And that was The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, which I think I read when I was probably about 15 and just blew me away. And I've read and reread it several times over the years and still think it's his best work by quite a distance. And it's a book I absolutely love. And I can't figure out where that's gone. I can visualise the paperback in my head, but it's no longer here. So if I had it and I could show it to you, that would have been on the list. So let's answer the big question. Why did I stop reading science fiction in my early 20s? Well, this was obviously the period of my life when I first went out to work, met a lot of new people, got a lot of new perspectives, and was exposed to a lot of new material in terms of both television, movies and books that people would recommend to me. Now, I stubbornly stuck to my obsession with reading science fiction and science fiction only, but I think I went slightly into a defence mode because I ditched the more lightweight, fun kind of novels that I enjoyed reading in favour for far more of the award-winning serious science fiction tomes that were out there. And after this gap of so many years, I can't actually recall all these kind of books that I read during what was a period of about a year, but I can tell you a few titles. Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany, Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, which I mentioned earlier, The Saratoga Barrier by Frank Herbert, Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, Barefoot in the Head by Brian Aldiss, Chthon by Piers Anthony and The Drought by J.G. Ballard. Those are just some of the ones that I read. Did I enjoy them? Not really. Although I did get quite a bit out of Stranger in a Strange Land, as I recall. But most of them struck me as deliberately obscure, vaguely pretentious, and pretty hard to understand. And I began to find that reading, something I'd always loved, was becoming a chore. Worse than that, I get to the end of a book and just feel kind of bewildered, as if I'd missed the point that the author was trying to make. And if there's one thing you don't want to do to your audience, is make them feel stupid. And that's what these books were doing to me. And I can clearly remember the last straw. That was a book called God of Tarot by Piers Anthony. And I'm going to reveal, I guess, which is a spoiler for the ending really, because I cannot forget the ending much as I want to. So I'll put a timestamp in the video and you can jump ahead probably about a minute or so if you don't want to find out how that book ends. Now, to the best of my somewhat fading memory, the book concerns a monk called Brother something or other who goes on this quest or mystical journey which involves encounters with various creatures and situations inspired by some of the cards from the tarot. As I say, it's all a bit vague, but I certainly remember the ending because at the climax, Brother What's-His-Name breaks through some kind of mystical barrier to find out what's at the centre of the universe and the meaning of it all. And it turns out to be a huge, giant, steaming turd. Yep, that's the ending. Ha ha ha. And with that, I was done. I never went back to science fiction in any serious way. I'd simply had enough. And in short order as well, I discovered authors like Raymond Chandler, Fyodor Dostoevsky, John Steinbeck, Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe. The list is endless. So I waved goodbye to science fiction, stuck it firmly in the rear view, and I've never looked back. But as I say, making the selections for these two videos has got me thinking, and it's got me a little bit nostalgic as well. And I kind of fancy rereading some of these. So maybe there is a way for me back into science fiction after 30-something years. Who knows? Never say never, I guess. Can you think of any science fiction novels that you think I might enjoy based on the selections that I've made? please put your suggestions in the comments below. I can't promise that I'll read the books you suggest, but I'll certainly consider it. Anyway, thank you very much for sticking with me right the way through to the end of this video. It's much appreciated. Please feel free to pop me a quick like and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. It would be really appreciated. And in the meantime, please keep searching through those strange narrow back streets of your small town to find those dusty second-hand bookshops. Please keep visiting those car boot sales, those charity shops and those market stalls, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.